According to the evangelist Dr. Luke, whom Chris mentioned, those who had followed Jesus' adventures in Jerusalem were beside themselves. The tomb was open, the body was missing, and then Jesus started turning up everywhere. Almost in two places at the same time, so it seemed. Jesus was always a miracle man, but now he could really get around. In the last chapter of the Gospel of Luke, there are at least 6 stories of seeing Jesus after the resurrection. And so once again, in Luke's story, as he was in John's story last week, the disciples were in the upper room trying to process all of the stories that they had heard about somebody seeing the resurrected Jesus, when Jesus appeared in their midst saying, "Peace be with you, et in terra pax." Like the telling that we read in the Gospel of John last week, the disciples did not say, "Laudamus te," as Joan and Annette sang so beautifully for us in worship this morning. No, they were terrified. They thought they had seen a ghost. And Jesus did what he always did when the disciples were slow to get it. He started loving on them and fussing at them at the same time. "It's me! Why are you so afraid? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? It's me. Look, touch me and see. Touch my hands, touch my feet, touch my sides." Luke says, so the disciples touched him. The disciples wanted to believe him, wanted to love him, wanted to trust him again, but they were rejoicing and disbelieving at the same time. They, like you and I in our lives, they were products of all that had happened, and they were victims of the way that they were raised. Jesus said he would come back from the dead, but we saw him suffer and languish on that cross. We saw the life drain out of him on that cross, along with the blood. We saw him die. Who restores their own body to life? But Jesus persisted. "So do you have anything to eat?" he asked. Luke said, they gave him some broiled fish. I can just imagine, for the disbelievers and the naysayers in that room, there must have been something going on like a drum roll. And in their presence, Luke says, Jesus ate it. What is the point of eating the fish? What was the point of a luncheon engagement in the midst of a struggle about life and death? For at least 5 centuries after the time of Jesus, the apostolic fathers waged a huge war about Jesus eating fish and whether there was a bodily resuscitation at Christ's resurrection. In the scriptures, the letter of 1 John denounces any believer who says he does not believe in the bodily resurrection. 1 John says, "We saw him with our eyes and touched him with our hands." In the 2nd century, Bishop and martyr Ignatius warned Christians to flee anyone who denied the resurrected body in favor of a purely spiritual Christ. In the 3rd century, theologian Origen quotes from a book that did not make it into the Bible, where Jesus says, "I am not an incorporeal spirit or a spirit with no Bible." And on it goes. In the 4th century, at the Council of Nicaea, from which comes the Trinity and the Nicene Creed, and the 5th century, at the Council of Chalcedon, where they decided Jesus does indeed have 2 natures, one physical and one divine, and they're both intertwined, but nobody can tell where they meet. In both of these councils, the disagreement with the bodily resurrection was terms for excommunication and maybe worse. And in Jesus' name, the worse was carried out on a great many people. The thought behind such a my way or the highway approach, where lives were taken, to the bodily resurrection, is that, as theologian Stephen Cooper writes, bodily resurrection expresses the affirmation, the hope, and the conviction that in spite of the fall, where Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, the human creature formed from the dust of the ground was still good the way God intended. But even Jesus argued that the concept of body had dimensions. In Matthew, the 16th chapter, 17th verse, it is Jesus who refers to the body as flesh and blood. The Apostle Paul's thinking was in depth. Something has to change. Paul says that the perishable body must put on imperishability. He says that the mortal body must put on immortality. What does that mean? You and I in the 21st century think of the body as made up of flesh, blood, soul, heart, and mind. Yet we are called to open our 21st century minds to the message of first century narrative. Was Luke talking about a bodily resurrection? Was Luke talking in metaphor? Would Jesus have wanted for over 5 centuries, 10 centuries if you count the Inquisition, if you count the Crusades, 16 centuries if you count the Inquisition and slavery, 20 centuries when you add the atrocities of the Holocaust, and as late as now as we consider humans in humanity to humanity, would Jesus have wanted anyone to be excommunicated from society, imprisoned and killed because they disagreed over the bodily nature of Christ's resurrection? It was Jesus who said, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden with whatever." It was Jesus who said, "Anyone who is heavy laden with anything, I will give you rest." How heartbroken must it make the Creator to see us after 21 centuries willing to kill each other, or disassociate from each other, or carry out ethnic cleansing on each other because we disagree over religious perspectives that ultimately don't amount to a hill of beans. Perhaps just like the creation story that shows the endless imagination of the Creator. I'm just suggesting, don't get mad at me and throw your bulletins. I am just suggesting that perhaps Jesus eating fish in the disciples' presence is another story. Like Jesus walking through the walls in the Gospel of John. Perhaps it's another story of Jesus being willing to move any obstacle, to do anything to get through their disbelief. Could this be another narrative of Jesus becoming grace and spirit ever present to the disciples and thus indeed ever present to the entire world? Because you see in this text, which Chris read in our hearing, as soon as the disciples saw Jesus eat the fish, there was no more disbelief. Fear was gone. Ghosts were gone. No more mention was made of it. And then Jesus was able to open their minds and read Scripture with them and show them that for Christ believers, everything in prophecy had led up to this new covenant of love and forgiveness, being God's people. Look, fear of the unknown is a natural response for any of us. We all have it. But Jesus meets the disciples just like he meets you and me, right where we are. And Jesus connects the dots to get to the disciples and to us into right relationship with him. What do you need for me to do to convince you that I am here for you? Touch my sides? Fine. Eat some broiled fish? Fine. That may be the importance of the story. That is the importance of any resurrection sighting story. Jesus has changed. Jesus in his altered form will still do anything to get to any of us. So, what is the fear that you have that is causing you to keep your mind closed and stay behind locked doors of unbelief on lockdown? In spite of the fact that resurrection is happening all around you. Fear may be very personal, like hearing the dreaded word cancer. We constantly lift up prayers against the fear that comes from unemployment, or loneliness, or loss. You and I fear international incidents, terrorist attacks, someone coming in and taking control of our homeland, and of course, the ultimate fear, the fear of death. Will my death be painful and long? Will I be humiliated? Who will take care of me? Is there enough time for me to accomplish the things that I still want to do? Is there enough money for me to live with some kind of honor as my body decays and I grow old? Why do I have to grow old and die at all? As our minds are open and we step away from doctrinal belief, Jesus comes to us in our fear, willing to do anything to get our attention. Anything in order to tell us that the power of the resurrection is the power to plant seeds of transformation first in our thinking. As we grow, we see that through the work of Jesus Christ, God calls us to peace. Et in terra pax. Jesus calls us to peace rather than security. Theologian Nancy Blakey says, hiding behind locked doors may make us feel more secure, but behind those doors we are still stuck with our fears and our insecurity. An unenlightened woman once wrote, "My soul is such a dark, icy place. I must keep it locked. I don't think I can let God anywhere near it." That woman was Mother Teresa. And as her mind was open, look what she was able to accomplish. Martin Luther King once wrote, "My mind is locked behind the doors of skepticism, especially at the irrational claims of religion, and locked behind the doors of embarrassment at the emotionalism of my father's testimonial preaching." But look what his unlocked, open mind was able to accomplish. With open, exposed, uncluttered minds, you and I understand that Jesus comes over any distance and will do anything to tell us that fear is not the opposite of faith, not believing is the opposite of faith. Jesus knows we fear, and Jesus knows that we will always fear. Jesus comes beckoning us to trust and move with courage in and through our fear. Jesus, as we are frightened out of our wits and believe that what we are going through and what we are seeing can't be real, Jesus appears in our midst saying, "Peace be with you." Et in terra pax. Oh God, what peace we often forfeit. Oh God, what needless pains we bear. All because we come looking for security when you come in your resurrected form offering us peace. In the midst of turmoil, teach us to be peaceful. In the midst of situations that we cannot control, teach us to be peaceful. As we get angry with ourselves because we can't do what we used to do, teach us how to be peaceful. Teach us to how, in turn, spread that peace from our souls to other souls and throughout all the earth. In your Son's name we pray.